Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the last day of the summit here. I know we have talked a lot about real-time payments over the last couple of days, and I'm quite excited for the panel this morning because I think we've got a fun topic here and kind of talking about the innovation around real-time payments. So I did want to mention first off here that we will have a Q&A section later in the panel, and you can either post your question in the event feed of the app, or you can tweet your question using Twitter and the hashtag #PayCanSummit, or we will have someone walking around. Rachel will walk around with a microphone later for questions in the room as well. So a couple of options there for questions, so keep that in the back of your mind as we're getting through our chat here. So I'm Bridget Hall. I'm from ACI Worldwide, and I'm the global expert for real-time payments for our customers around the world on how customers can get ahead with real-time payments. And we've got a great panel with us today. I'll start with Derek Vernon down there, who is the leading voice of PayMod for both BMO and in the industry, and he is already on a successful path with real-time payments. I've got Giles Eubanks, who is a global payments transformation analyst across the full financial services gamut for IT Group. I've got Pedro Maya, who is a Pan-American fraud innovation expert from Scotiabank, specializing in cross-functional collaboration approaches on payment projects. And David Grindle, who is a hyper-experienced Canadian payments consultant focused on supporting banks and processors, and also my colleague at ACI. Okay. So starting off, talking about real-time payments and innovation, given kind of the global trends that we've seen on the RTP rails, where do you guys see the demand for this in Canada? And Giles, I'd maybe like to kind of kick off with you on that.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming, making it to day 3 this early. Well done. So when it comes to real-time, the demand for it, globally, this is very much a large global trend. Many markets are moving in this direction, but each market's a little bit different, right? The dynamics, the underpinnings, the regulatory environment, the bank environment. No two markets are exactly the same, even though they're driven by very similar drivers and pushes. Now, most markets, it's very retail-led, right? The regulators are pushing this. Oftentimes, it's to benefit consumers, drive electronic usage, increase financial inclusion, and what have you. And kind of market by market, we're seeing that roll out. Some regions faster than others. Some are ahead. Some are coming on board. Some regions, like the U.S. in particular, it's quite distinct. But I think let's perhaps get to that one a little bit later. Its own kind of crazy, unique dynamics. But Canada, what I think really stands out in my mind, which I think is very interesting. So most markets are very consumer, retail, P2P focused. Right? Very much the thinking is that's the starting point. We'll build it there. That'll benefit consumers. It's an easy to understand use case. And then from there, we'll branch out. We'll build everything else, and it'll be wonderful. We don't know exactly how it'll get there, but it'll be amazing. Trust us. Canada, though, Payments Canada, they're very explicit about this. They're taking a much more commercially sensitive approach. Right? It's very much commercial first, looking at the needs of the broader payments environment, not just that narrow P2P gap. And the big distinction, I think, is Canada, it already has a pretty good P2P system. Interac is here. E-transfers is widely in use. Consumers use it. It's well integrated into the banking environment. People understand it. They use it. It doesn't necessarily need a replacement right away. But that commercial side, right? It's very much, it's at the forefront of the design, of the vision of where things are going to go longer term. And I think that's very distinct. And I think that's very telling. And personally, I think that's very promising. I think it's a very healthy approach that will prove quite successful longer term.
Interesting.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add to that.
Yeah.
So welcome, everybody. Thanks. You had choice this morning, and we appreciate you choosing us. We were going to serve mimosas and have Kawhi Leonard appear, but that was logistically a little bit difficult. I also want to thank the 97 BMO people for showing up this morning. Really appreciate that. So, I think what Giles is saying is absolutely right. Canada is starting from a position of strength. We have some great capabilities already in market, and the focus to commercial makes a ton of sense. If I think about BMO in particular, we're a leading commercial North American commercial bank, and we hear often from our customers the need to really look at better ubiquity in the market and having a much better, easy way to move money across the border. Settlement in real time is important. Having full transparency end-to-end of that payment is something that our customers are looking for. And of course, the holy grail is data. We've talked a lot about what's most important as we think about real-time payments and innovation. And payments move pretty fast today, but really it's unlocking and unleashing the value of all that data. And there's tremendous opportunity and use cases as you think about where that data can be leveraged, both from a B2C perspective, also importantly from a B2B, business-to-business perspective. Companies are looking for that data to build automation into their processes, to build productivity, of course, and improve their productivity so they can continue to compete on a global scale. And the movement of data with the payment and obviously adopting a global interoperable standard like ISO 20022, which you've heard a lot about over the last couple of days, is essential for us to achieve that. Maybe I'll end it there because there's I'm sure lots. We'll dive into that deeper in a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So knowing that we've got some opportunities with data, I think there's probably a lot of other opportunities to enhance the solution for Canada and kind of capitalize on some of that demand. Pedro, do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely, and building on what Derek said is data is key, and we have a great opportunity to improve our fraud strategies, or really any strategy that the financial institutions may have. Having a 360-degree view of our customer financial data, non-financial data, will help us improve our strategies to be able to anchor things that are critical. That is that security that consumers and commercial and small business customers expect from us, and continue to build on that trust that they have on the system. So definitely we're looking forward. I think one of the very important things that we're doing, I think across the industry and the ecosystem, is be able to better partner, be on day one to see what is needed, what needs to be enhanced, what needs to be changed. That will help us to get better. I have seen that a strong collaboration within the company, with the different stakeholders, and really with our peers at other banks and other FIs.
Maybe I'll just also add, I think collaboration is absolutely key. So I think you've hit that right on the head. And as I think about the various committees that I'm involved in, Payments Canada has recognized right away that it's going to take a village to bring us to fruition. And you've heard that theme resonate across modernization and the sessions that you've attended. We have to really be mindful of safety and soundness. That's something that Canada, I think, on a global scale, should be very proud of. And when we think about cyber and we think about fraud, it's really, really important that we keep that top of mind. As payments move faster, those risks start to elevate, and we have to make sure that the fraud capabilities mirror and are at the same pace as we start to unlock the value that we talk about with innovation. And at BMO in particular, we're really thinking through how best, from a governance point of view, how to structure and how to set that up, because we don't want the modernization process or the capabilities that we're building to get too far ahead of our fraud capabilities. And I know in talking to my peers and meetings that we have across the industry, I think most of the members of Payments Canada are thinking about that in the same way.
There's interesting opportunities. So there's the internal collaboration, but also recognize that Canada is not the first place in the world to do this. So there's opportunities to collaborate with other markets, see what they've done, see how Faster Pay in the UK, how banks in other markets and regions have adopted Faster Pay fraud, and learn those lessons before they come to Canada. We're not starting at the starting gate. We're starting kind of halfway down the track.
And echoing that, talking to counterparts in the UK, was the lesson learned is like ensure that you're engaged from day one. It's very important to get ahead of the game, because you don't need to reinvent the wheel in some aspects. There are uniquenesses at the markets, but there are some things that we just need to leverage what has been done before. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, if I can ask a question to the bankers on the board, I'm curious, because everyone talks. Of course, everyone needs to work together. We need solidarity. We need work across the team. Banks still tend to be very siloed, right? I know we all know it's a bad thing, but it's reality, right? There's a lot of kind of competing effects. And one of the things that's happened in a lot of markets when new payment tools launch is fraud is kind of kick to the long grass to get something out the door and to keep it a little bit hush-hush. It happened in the UK with faster payments, right? They're like, we need to get this out. It happened with Apple Pay, right? Where the banks were very quick, we need to get this out the door. We'll kind of quietly deal with fraud later. I'm just curious, is this something that the banks are talking about? Are you guys kind of aware of this? Is this like top of mind?
Yes, so I think that definitely, of course, in many aspects, the banks are, we're in a very competitive environment. But I think on the fraud aspect, the enemy is outside. Like we don't want as financial institutions to really have a vulnerability in when we're going and build faster payments. If BMO is doing something well, I know that fraudster may want and attack Scotia. So we need to be on the same page. There will be, of course, we want to compete and win in the marketplace, no doubt about that. But that's just make us stronger. One of the things that we want to ensure is, at the end of the day, the trends on consumers or in companies are transitory, but the needs like security and trust, those are permanent. So we cannot be jeopardize that by not talking. If I talk to BMO, talk to CIBC, our other peers, we will learn from what has happened before. So I think that it's a great incentive and is one of the many offsides of PayMod.
Yeah, let me just put that notion to bed. We are not treating this project or program as in a siloed way. Most of my peers that I meet with on a very regular basis have put in place governance and programs that are cross-functional in nature to exactly go address the point that you raise. Speaking just for my bank, the governance that we put in place includes fraud. So in the steering committees and programs that we have in place, we have a stream that's really focused on the fraud capabilities. As those fraud capabilities are being worked through, the leader of that sits on the steering committee of the payment modernization program. I sit on the fraud, we call it fraud mod actually, the fraud modernization steering committee. So there's lots of cross-pollination, sharing of ideas. That's just within our own bank. And then as I think about more broadly, Payments Canada has recognized this as well. And there's committees that have been stood up that have the representatives of all the leaders of fraud across a lot of the large members, and not just the large members actually. There's members of all sizes that are involved in that, and not just looking at banks, but also looking at other entities in the ecosystem to make sure that we're not there's no blind spots. We really need to think holistically when it comes to fraud, because those fraudsters are smart people, and we have to try and always stay one step ahead of them.
So kind of thinking about that, where you're talking about holistically on the transaction part of it and kind of that end-to-end thinking. Giles, I wonder if you have some thoughts about some other business or market opportunities to others that apply kind of that end-to-end thinking from the business proposition perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, as I mentioned earlier, it's people tend to think P2P when they think real time, right? It's the easy kind of use case, but that's not where the money and the real value is. Definitely not, especially within Canada. Now, just to kind of give an example, if you look at, say, the commercial cards market, right? Most people think of an old travel and expenses card. It's an Amex, charge some martinis to it, and that's it. But that market's been exploding the last couple of years, right? There's been massive shifts and changes in terms of the technology that's involved, right? You're seeing a huge growth of not just purchasing cards, but virtual cards, right? So see, these are single-use cards, digitally issued, where the account number is tied into that one specific transaction. And that way, it can't be intercepted and reused later. But more importantly, that number is tied to that transaction value, right? So that aids reconciliation and automation on the back end, right? It's a roundabout way of doing it. That's exploding in popularity, right? And the buyer side buyers, they love it, right? Because this is a new means of payment, which, yes, they get rebates from that, which is beneficial. It improves their cost of payment, but they can automate. Right? They can work that into their ERP systems. They can integrate that into all sorts of back office systems that go far beyond just payments in and of itself. And that's a fairly crude way of doing it, right? Of getting this data tied into a payment and jamming that into your back office systems. But you think of something like Realtime, where the data is so much richer, right? Where the capabilities of what you can tie in, the visibility of that transaction, just the fact that it's real time, do you even need that much visibility, right? Where it is, but you can tie in that data. What's that transaction? It's much more secure. That demand is very strong. Businesses are looking for new ways to pay. Again, if you go back to the retail market, like so many other sectors, a big factor in the growth of real-time has been displacing cash, right? Displacing paper, moving away from checks. Check use in the business side is still shockingly high, right? It's still very high. That's a prime opportunity right there. Replace that with something more electronic, more digital, more automated, easier to integrate, right? That's very much, I think, where the opportunity lies, and that's very much where the future lies.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that the growth that could be on the commercial and small business space is amazing, and how at the end of the day, and we're seeing that in other markets, particularly in Asia. No, they already have adopted like that culture of real-time payments across consumers and small business, and they see the value that it will help them grow. And I think that's what I will say the big expectation from the Canadian market will be like, hey, how I can grow, how I can make my business better, and I think how we work with that. And I think the key element of the data, be able to have that view that is more complex than a consumer, be able to understand who are your suppliers, who are those suppliers that from a fraud perspective, we need to ensure that we ensure that those transactions get approved fast and secure, and where there will be any potential threats that we need to work to ensure that those business owners trust the bank that we will be able to process their transaction safely and secure.
One opportunity I really look forward to, and this is going over the work we got in the next couple of years, is when Canada gets to go cross-border. So we talk about frictionless as being a goal. We hear that story over and over again from Uber. So most of us in this room are old enough to remember when our debit cards could first be used internationally. So as a traveler, as a vacationer, think about the friction you used to have. Whether you got traveler's checks, you had to go to a local branch to get foreign currency, you had to go to a money changer in the town square and pay 9 or 10% commissions because you arrived on a Sunday morning. And when your debit card worked internationally, that just all disappeared. You got off a plane, you found an ATM, and you had local currency. Right? So now think about a Canadian corporate paying a U.S. vendor, supplier, or vice versa, and all the mess. I'm going to send a RTR. It's going to go through an interlock to probably a TCH and get to my destination. And then after that, we'll do the same thing for the EU or for Australia or other markets. But that just makes a whole mess of pain go away for a corporate. So I know that's not in the next 3 or 4 years, but as an ultimate opportunity, that's going to do really good things for the Canadian economy.
Yeah, I agree with my panelists. We have to think about the friction. We have to follow our customers' needs. And if you listen to customers, they are talking about data. They are talking about ubiquity. They are talking about interoperability. They want us to. You've heard on the main stage a lot over the last couple of days. The payment is kind of moving to the back, right? The actual payment is less important than what moves with that payment and what we can do around the experience for our customers, both from a retail perspective and commercial. So as banks and working in partnership with fintech and with open banking, it's all coming down to how do we deliver collectively a better experience for our customer. The payment itself will happen because there's really smart people that'll figure out how to make that payment move. But how do we take advantage of the modernization that we're all working towards to create tons and tons of value, to take the friction out of the system, to take checks out of the system, and to ultimately make Canada a really competitive environment where businesses want to set up, grow, and thrive, and that's what this is really all about.
So if I can pipe in just one more. I mean, for the larger corporates, it's all about the data and the speed. But one corner that I think kind of gets a little bit lost sometimes amidst the noise between retail and corporate is the small business side, right? Which sometimes kind of sits between the two. Obviously, they do need more data as well, right? Everyone talks about digital transformation, but that really is happening in every industry, right? Even small coffee shops have, fancy MPOS tablets and whole back office systems tied into that via apps. But just don't forget with small businesses, liquidity, right? Kind of cash flow. Those things are very important. If they can get their money faster, that will be a major benefit to them. Will help their businesses.
And you're seeing banks that are thinking that way. With the data, we're able to offer enhanced services to those small businesses. Those small businesses typically have one person that's wearing many, many hats, right? And they don't have the time to have dedicated people managing cash flow and dealing with how to more efficiently collect payments and make payments. So it's on us collectively to figure out how do we bring together the ecosystem to take the friction out and to make that experience better and to provide better advice through the online interfaces, mobile or online, to take that work away and to make it much easier. And that value, we talk about where are we going to create value. That's exactly where it's going to happen. The value is not in the transaction. The value is in the experience.
So on that, with the value and the value-added services, Pedro, do you have any thoughts on what some good use cases are for value-added services within the Canadian market?
For sure, definitely on the fraud space, it's a great opportunity. We need to get the basics right, but that maniacal focus to improve the customer experience is really how we can improve our prevention strategies and our detection strategies and be able to define, again, for our different base of consumers, commercial, retail, small business, how we want to communicate with them. We need to reduce friction, but they want to know what is happening, how they can monitor that payment. So developing that two-way communication is where the opportunity is and where we're working within the bank to be able to develop those communication strategies.
David, what about you? Any thoughts on that one?
Again, going a little future. One of the speakers 2 days ago, I think our first day, was the Google API, ex-Apogee guy. He had a great concept of APIs being enabling the bank to, he sees them less as a gateway inbound than an ability for a financial institution to extend their presence out into the payments ecosystem where their customers are. So if your customers today, whether consumer or corporate, is enacting something in a digital realm, that you can place the payment experience into that realm through an API ecosystem. That is going to lead to some really interesting use cases. So when, again, the ecosystem is up and running, there are third-party API gateways and PSIPs, it gets really interesting for two kids in a garage to go figure out a use case where, if because I know I can do this payment safely and securely, I can create this opportunity that's of value to a consumer or a corporate. A savings like a savings app or something that engaging a payment, and that's going to drive really interesting, really neat use cases. The banks are doing these. They're innovating as fast as they can to find these use cases. But the whole PSIP ecosystem makes that open to the rest of the world as well. That's going to be really exciting when the infrastructure and the plumbing is in place, and then people can innovate on top of that.
Yeah, that's what makes me most excited about modernization. It's exactly what you're saying. It's, the banks have a lot of legacy systems, as we all know, and being able to put in place the right infrastructure to be able to unlock some of that, and then to connect to all of the great, amazing ideas that we've heard here at this conference, and from fintech and smaller, more nimble organizations that have great ideas. That the more that we can bring that together and think of the possibilities, that's what really gets me excited.
I think a useful way of looking at this is just to kind of flip it on its head and just think, where is this not useful? Right? Where would it be better if a transaction was slower and had less data tied into it, right? And there's not a lot, right? Really, the use cases are basically every form of payment you can think of. As I was saying, as like you keep repeating, it's the P2P side's perhaps the least exciting, but there's definitely still benefits there, right? You can have a slicker, better environment. But one area that I think we'll probably see a lot of development is the disbursement side, right? So the business to consumer market, right? But suddenly you can tie things into more app-driven, more real-time. You get a refund from whatever online purchase. All those different use cases suddenly start playing in. A bill payment, right? Suddenly that transaction's gone through. It's there. It's done. There's no waiting over the weekend to see if it's cleared. Think of a payment. It'll benefit, right? Those use cases are pretty legion.
Yeah, so there's the classic, when we talk about real-time payments, we tend to jump to the emergency bill payment, right? Someone at 2 a.m. wants to wake up and pay their bill. I'd rather sleep, but I guess there are people that want to pay a bill at 2 a.m. But there will be people. What I see as a killer app is the request for payment. We've seen that in other geographies. A lot of real-time payment countries that have moved to real-time payments have launched a request to pay capability. I do see this as a really, really interesting use case, especially as we think about, back to your cash flow example, the ability for corporate to immediately issue an invoice for payment and through a secure channel, because at the end of the day, we constantly remind our customers not to click things that they're not sure where it's coming from, so we have to think through the user experience. But let's assume it's delivered through a channel that customers trust, being able to then immediately acknowledge and that payment moving with confirmation on both sides. I think that with the associated data, like that to me is definitely a killer app, and we're excited to start working on that.
So on that, you mentioned that you're seeing that in other countries. Do you have other lessons that you've seen in other countries that you hope to kind of learn and bring back to Canada?
Yeah, and I think often people say Canada's late, and I wouldn't agree with that. I think Canada has lots of great examples of modernization and innovation that we should celebrate. That being said, we've seen the UK starting to modernize back as far as 2008, and already now having to remodernize and put in place new infrastructure to support emerging use cases. Australia, we've heard a lot about Australia. India is another great example of how we've seen rapid adoption of faster payments. So there's a lot of lessons that we can learn, and that's exactly what we're doing. As I think of the committees back to that I'm involved in, we are looking at what other jurisdictions have done and try and learn from any opportunities there, but to capitalize and to use that as a platform for innovation and ideas.
Yes. Speaking on that, like the UK lesson is great after going through that first modernization, and the investments that they did in fraud capabilities. Now they're much better. They came out stronger, and that's something that right now we're taking that lesson learned and making these investments now. Be able to get that funding, saying, hey, we want to minimize disruption for our customer base. We want to improve the customer experience. We need to make these strategic investments to be able to have a holistic and robust solution to be able to enable, again, going back to provide security and trust to our customers. So we're having that at the table. We're getting investments, and I think that's the new norm. That's what I like, is waiting, let's say Canada goes now for a first wave, and then we change. It will be that continuous improvement into improving capabilities.
Actually, if I can maybe bring this right back to the theme of today, right, kind of monetization of real-time payments. Now, a lot of markets, if you look at, I think the UK and Australia are probably the best comparisons to Canada, right? Very similar sort of, infrastructure. Australia is very similar sort of size. Markets are broadly aligned in quite a few different ways. Now, when the NPP rolled out, I remember speaking to quite a few Australian banks, and their big issue was, it wasn't so much how do we build it, what's it going to look like. It's, they tend to be a fairly competitive people. It was very, how are we going to get one up on the competition, right? How are we going to differentiate? How are we going to make money out of this? I want to beat, ANZ wants to beat CBA, whatever it may be. And what's a very telling example, I think, which sums up so much of the market, is actually the UK. If you look, and I know I was just poo-pooing P2P payments, but right, if you look at what Barclays did with their Ping It app, right? So they launched an app called Ping It, which was a consumer P2P app, right? And it had a slick design interface, big ad campaign, launched on the App Store. Big success, right? Was open to all users, not just Barclays users, right? It was a means for them, they grew their base quite large outside of their current customers. They got all their details. I don't know what the conversion rates were after that, but they got more involved in transactions outside of their other base. The actual underlying technology was the exact same as every other bank in the UK, right? They weren't actually doing anything different. The only thing they did was they got some marketing, they got a good app, right? And they pushed it out to consumers. And because they were quick, because they made it slick, because they had high visibility, consumers just thought, oh, this is cool, that's new, even though every other bank could do it, right? It's just that question of, okay, we have those capabilities, but just market it, right? Package it up. What does that customer experience look like? I think that's the real lesson to be learned there, right? Everyone's going to be having the same capabilities, but it's how do you kind of tie those up and to create something new and unique and make your own business stand out, and gain from a monetary side.
So a lot of our opportunities, discussions, we're thinking about outward, customer-facing, consumer and corporates. There's also one that focuses inwards. And when we look at markets where we've seen financial institutions take on this PayMod challenge, you also need to look inward to something as basic and as boring as infrastructure. So, and probably not a surprise for any banker in the room. You're dealing with the legacy systems you've had built up over 40 years. And you're not going to pull and rip and replace those, but you need a layer somewhere in there that can handle the challenges of the next 5 years. And then the next 10 years after that. It's going to be both Canadian PayMod, it's going to be the international piece I talked about. We spend most of our time here today focusing on immediate and real-time rail, but there's also links coming. So there's going to be just challenges galore running on the payment side. And banks have got to look internal and see, what do I need to do to my core systems or a layer in front of my core systems to be able to react to that. You have the requirements you have today, and you know that those are going to change over the next 5 years. So if you think of a UK bank that thought they were good with faster payments, and now you're going to renovate the whole thing again, and they're looking at how to redo backs. And so we're going to go through the same things in Canada. So that might be one of the hardest jobs you get, and Derek will probably speak to that one, because BMO's going through it, right? That's going to be a harder job internally because of the complexity of your existing systems than is any fancy new app to be able to put out in the App Store. The internal challenge of renovating your infrastructure for PayMod is going to be a big one.
Yeah, maybe I will talk to that. Feels a bit like a setup there, but so we sat back maybe almost 2 years ago and seeing the modernization initiative take fold, and how are we going to approach this as a bank? There's back to the whole legacy comment. We do have a lot of legacy systems. We do need to figure out how we can ensure that we can adapt and be more agile in our approach, and look for opportunities to also unlock some value along the way. So, in partnership with ACI, we went through an RFP process. We did select ACI, and we did select their product, and we put it in between our legacy systems and our front line channels systems, and we found that it was able to enable us to really connect everything together in a way that can enable us to immediately solve some business challenges that we had, and that was helpful in terms of how do we position this to our senior management, because it's not cheap to implement these things. So having a business case that could set us up for the future and set us up to be able to connect to links and to connect to some of the new and emerging exchanges, not just in Canada but also in the US. And we found with that product it enabled us to do that, and the business case was strong for us, because we could start to connect to some of our systems to give new product capability along the way. So it's not building something now for something that will happen later, but put something in place now that can enable us to be more nimble and be ready. And the concept that we kind of looked at as I stand back is it's a concept that we've seen in other industries. Take the shipping industry, where it was a very decentralized model, and then FedEx and other companies talked about bringing and centralizing. So if you can have a platform that can help you receive transactions coming from various different platforms, and then process those transactions, and whether it's an AML process or a fraud process, and then prepare that transaction. So now you're getting into data standardization, ISO, right through to delivery and connectivity to that rail, whether it's an existing rail or a new rail. That's kind of the way we thought about it, and we're well down the path, and very proud with ACI and the award that we won recently. I think is an acknowledgement from an external body to say that we're along the way.
Okay. Well, that was a lot of a great discussion here, and thank you, Derek, for that kind compliment to ACI, of course. We appreciate you as well.
You'll invite me back next year?
We will invite you back next year. So I took a few key notes here as we were kind of discussing that Canada is starting from a position of strength for the commercial side. We've got fraudsters that are smart, and it takes collaboration both internally and externally. Use cases where can we not use data-rich transactions, and then just as we were discussing there, that banks need to think about the long-term impact for the legacy systems. So I'd like to open this up for some questions. If you have a question here in the room, feel free to raise your hand, and we've got Rachel, who's very nice to help us out here.
Hi. Earlier you discussed shifting, well, basically you look at payment as part of the entire experience. Do you think there will be a shift of where revenue will come from? Say, for example, in a bank, do you think the revenue will come from the issuing side to some other areas in the bank? Is it something the bank will proactively plan for, or would you let the market decide where it would go?
Yeah, it's a great question. So yes, I do think that the revenue mix, if I can use it that way, will change. You heard that, I think, on the main stage. I think Victor actually was asked that question around, do we see the transaction price, heading to zero? That's a concept that a lot of people have been talking about. It's incumbent on us to find the value and unlock the value and follow our customer needs, right? So with more data, I believe we'll create lots of new and innovative opportunities that customers will see value and they'll pay for that value. If it's just processing a transaction, that's table stakes. Customers expect that a bank will just process that transaction. But I really need to think about, and we really need to think about the overall experience and how do we offer, back to the small business example, how do we take that data and turn that into advice and other pieces of value that customers will agree that they'll pay for that. Open banking, again, being able to have data in a way that is more compatible and can connect and be shared in a safe way to be able to collaborate more with fintech to create a lot of these new, create and roll out a lot of these new and exciting use cases. So I definitely think that there'll be a change, and we're already thinking about that because it's not something that's happening in the future, it's happening now.
Pedro, did you have anything?
Yes, echoing what Derek said is, the transaction of a payment is just an element. It's really about what that consumer, that corporation wants to do. No, they want to grow their business. They want to have a lifestyle of a certain kind. And in the way that we have that basic, that is the payment, done well, done fast, done secure, that opens opportunity to say, I want to develop a relationship with a bank, no? Hopefully it's a Scotia, no? Like whoever the consumer wants to bank with, they want to build that relationship and knowing that we have their back, no? So they can do whatever they want to achieve from a personal or business side.
Great. Do we have a question in the back there?
Yeah, I was shocked to hear that we think we're innovative and not behind. Facts are, Canada, in fact, is behind 40 different systems around the world in terms of faster payments. And so I think Realtime Rail, that's what we had to talk about. We're behind 40 countries, including many African countries, which is pretty alarming to me. I think if you read the Paytech report, which was launched a few days ago, you will see that in just about every domain of innovation in payments, we are behind. And it does compare, and they're all years behind. So I don't know, Apple Pay, everything, every single aspect of payments, we're actually behind. Sorry, I know there was a statement. I do have a question. My question is, you speak about fraud and how you're concerned that fraud's going to go up, and how I agree with the principle that we need to maintain our safety and soundness. But banks don't report all the fraud. So how are we going to know if fraud goes up when we're introducing a whole bunch of new entrants in fintechs and commercial businesses into the payments ecosystem in our real-time rail, if you don't report all the fraud today? How do we benchmark it?
It's always, I probably should be answering that, right?
Yeah.
I think that what is not fraud goes up, the tax go up every time that you implement a new capability, you make a change, you introduce a new product. The threats will be there. Doesn't mean that fraud will go up, because that's why we need to be working from day one to understand that and be able to put the right controls. And I think that's a great opportunity that I think compared to the other countries. So not being leading the way sometimes helps you to your advantage. No, we have learned from those experiences, and it's really how we want to do it. Fraud is not reported, no, but we will really work with different companies to try to get a benchmark to really understand that. And I think getting that collaboration with the banks that we were mentioning at the beginning, we have a sense, no? It's not about telling the secret sauce, but we see a threat on something, we communicate amongst the banks, no? Because the threat that maybe BMO may be experiencing, RBC, CIBC, even not one of the top 5, we want to know because maybe something that A is happening to me and I was not aware, or it may be happening to me and I can take preventive actions. So it still is a learning process, but I do see the collaboration being strong on the fraud space within Canada. No, I have seen that better compared to my Latin American experience. Canadians in that aspect, we are more open. And I think right now this one is really creating that critical milestone, that critical point that we need to be. Fraudsters, they talk. They have a strong community, very well developed. It is making us take a similar approach. We need to be working together towards preventing the fraud and be able to manage those threats that they will be there in a better way. And I think we're in a position of strength, and we'll feel very confident that we'll be ready.
Maybe I'll just add a couple things. So we talk about prevention, and I think as we think about opening up access, I think it's really, really important that we think about ensuring that anyone that has access to the ecosystem and to the payment systems meets a minimum standard of authentication and capability to ensure that we don't let, that we try and prevent fraud from coming into the system. So protecting the outside, I think, is really, really important. I think there's been tremendous advancement in technology. We heard on the main stage, I think it was Vocalink, that showed some great capability that's out there, and leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning to really try and connect the dots. That technology was not in place back when the UK launched faster payments. So as an industry, I think it's incumbent on us to think through how do we deploy technology like that? Where does that technology best sit? Does it sit in each of our financial institutions? Does it sit somewhere else where you could aggregate and collect that fraud data to be able to protect the systems? And then collaboration, as Pedro mentioned, and as we talked about earlier, sharing data where that makes sense. It's not competitive. It's really about protecting safety and soundness. So how do we set ourselves up with the right policy and structure and governance to make sure that we're sharing the right amount of data to try and always stay ahead of the bad guys. And if we see something, lock the door so they can't continue to harm those that are in the system.
Actually, if I can just push back on the point that Canada is not modern or innovative compared to so many other countries.
I was hoping you were going to do that. Yeah.
I'm going to say it's not the fastest, absolutely, right? There's many markets that are moving much more quickly. We're seeing digital disruption in payments, really exploding in some markets in ways we can't even imagine, right? Just look at the Chinese market, or even markets like Kenya, right? Much of Africa is advancing quite quickly when it comes to real-time rails. But Canada, as I always say to my boss, right, when I'm late with something, you're only late once, but you're bad forever, right? So it's good to get it, build it correctly, do a good job. Where Canada stands, I would say twofold. One, digital take-up's actually pretty good for an advanced payment economy, right, compared to even much of Europe, definitely compared to the US. Consumers and businesses do tend to take up new payment tools relatively quickly. I mean, just look at EMV or contactless cards here compared to the US. But the bigger issue, I think, for Canada, where it does stand out, is convergence, right? I know we're focusing on RTR today, but it's the fact that it's all of the payment clearing and settlement systems that are being modernized. That's unique. I'm not aware of any other market that's quite as advanced in terms of at least their vision of let's make everything, ISO 20022, let's make everything real time, create this real behemoth of a system. It's very ambitious. I'm sure there'll be a lot of learnings along the way that other markets will learn from. But I think Canada, I think it's doing pretty well, considering where it is.
Yeah, I think we should applaud the measured approach that's actually being taken versus, stick to the narrative that Canada's behind. Because I truly believe that Canada's not behind in the aggregate. You can always point to specific solutions and have an example, but in the aggregate, as you say, it's a very ambitious program. But I think as time progresses and as we start to roll out these capabilities, always keeping safety and soundness paramount, I think we'll have something to celebrate, and people will look back and be very happy that they were part of this once-in-a-generation opportunity.
Great.
I'll add one point to the fraud discussion, which is we spend, as an industry, we spend an enormous amount of attention and an enormous amount of financial resources on the detection side. Big data, AI, machine learning, like we're dropping enormous amounts of focus on that, but it's an after the fact, let's fix the problem that's happened and try and get around it and save more money. I'd like to see as much focus on preventing it before we start. And as we move into the digitization realm, whether we're talking about projecting API ecosystems, frictionless payments where you make it disappear, we're talking about digital identity, right? And I think as a country, we need, as an industry, need a lot more focus on digital identity, so we just shut the gate before it even starts. You're chasing we're in a red green race with the fraudsters. No matter how good our detection tools get, they've got just as much investment dollars as our banks with none of the government's restrictions. So it's going to continue. We need to shut the door beforehand with a better digital identity system so that when a corporate or a consumer is initiating that payment, you know it actually was that corporate. We're doing some stuff, some good stuff in Canada. We could probably be better. It's more of a global problem than just Canada, but I'd love to see as much attention there as we have on fraud detection. Sorry,
Okay.
minor
So,
Good point.
speech there.
so just maybe a comment and a question, just on the last 2 points about the ambition and the approach that Canada's taking. I think it's worth noting that Jerry Gates was up on the stage at the very beginning of the session and said, the plan that Canada implemented was actually the bare minimum that he believed that was needed to be done to move Canada forward. So I think that's an important observation. My question is, so when Payments Canada introduced the Modernization Initiative in 2015, the plan was to have the real-time rail, I believe, up and running by 2019, so this year. Interact was chosen as the rail for reasons of ubiquity, which I think most people appreciate. But now we're back at the drawing board, where we're having to reevaluate who's actually going to be the rail, how's the rail going to be designed. So we're clearly not going to be implementing in 2019. I'm curious if any of the panelists can share some perspectives on what are the challenges that we're experiencing getting this rail up and running, and when will we actually be able to start to talk about Canadian innovation on a real-time rail versus the experiences of other countries?
Thoughts?
Start?
Oh, man.
That's a good one.
Look at that, we're out of time. Well, thank you very much. Go ahead, Charles.
Oh, man. I'm trying to think what I can say here. I need to just keep it delicate and polite as well, right? Give the PR line. Look, building these things is difficult, right? Canada's doing a lot of things simultaneously. Links is obviously taking the priority for the time being. I don't have any particular insight into why is it going so slow, right? I think there is just a component of, there's still a lot of technical details that need to be worked out. I think Payments Canada, I'm probably going to get barred from this conference for saying this, probably needs to do a better job of working with the vendors, right? Kind of with the industry, of keeping the technology side and the bank side, everyone working together to really understand where we are, right? What I'm hearing from much of the market is kind of one side has a rough idea, the other side doesn't really know, kind of has a rough idea, and they're not really speaking as much as they should do, and everyone's kind of just wondering, what's going on. So I think there's a big factor of communication there. When it's going to happen, I don't know. I mean, it will happen. I think it'll get there, hopefully eventually, and hopefully not too watered down. What makes me nervous about the delays is, the more delays kick in, the ambition starts suddenly getting kind of dialed back, and, well, we got to be realistic. And things start changing. Until we see more concrete specs come out, I think only then will we get a much better view on this.
Look, let me say this. This is hard work. I'm on a lot of committees, and I don't think this is something that Payments Canada should wear. This is something that collectively we're all working towards making Canada a better place. This is very, very difficult. You've got a lot of stakeholders. You've got banks. You've got vendors, to your example. We have to make sure that the decisions that are made are going to answer the needs of customers, and we were going down a road that was more retail focused. And I think the pause was the right decision to kind of step back and let's actually take some time, and that's exactly what Payments Canada did. They undertook some research with corporates and commercial customers in particular who today are underserved as it comes to real-time payments and some of their needs. We talked earlier about P2P is in a good spot. So let's understand what are those needs of commercial customers. That work has been done. That work is now being reviewed. And Payments Canada, I'm sure in the very near term, will make a decision on how best to move the country forward. And it's a very collaborative process. I do share your view that we have to move on and we have to make some tough decisions. But I'm pretty confident that that'll happen in the very near term. And we have to keep our eye on links. That is the #1 priority. That's been stated right from the get-go, back to the vision statement and from the Bank of Canada and the Department of Finance. And the banks are very busy working in partnership with Payments Canada to make sure that links is delivered effectively and safely and securely. And we will also work in partnership with Payments Canada on their decision on the real-time rail.
Great. On that, we'll move on to the next question. We're getting close to time here.
Yeah,
there we are.
thank you. I'm a little bit building on that because it was partly my question as well. So looking at other jurisdictions, and I'm from Europe and have a better view there. So if you look at other jurisdictions, how they have built the rails, very often they start with a kind of scheme, and the scheme would include also aspects like security. I'm not talking about fraud, but rather this security that comes with a certain settlement model that takes out risk. And I think that is some of the key things that other jurisdictions have concentrated on for a long time and then let the services layer develop. And I think that that's what we see in Canada. The services layer is pretty far and progressed. And what I sometimes wonder is there enough clarity on the need for that part of the clearing and settlement on the lower end where other jurisdictions have spent months and months and years to sort it out, and where then when we talk about use cases, the stability and the grounding is there. So if you think about Europe, we started with 15,000 euro and it goes up in November to 100,000 euro. And if you look at the UK, so the roadmap towards use cases might include these high amounts. The same was in faster payments in the UK, and that was possible because the foundation was there. Mm-hmm. And that is something where I wonder, is there enough clarity? What do you think from the panel? You're the experts from Canada. Do you think it's there? Is there kind of lag? Is that possible that the banking, the stakeholders and the bankers get together and find a solution for that? Because coming from other jurisdictions, we see there has to be a council. There is the central bank gives a kind of roadmap or what. How do you see that happening in Canada?
If you go to the very beginning of the Paymont effort, you'll find that Payments Canada has been very focused on the entire liquidity and settlement risk management model, whether it's from on the links, the LVTS to links side, or the real-time rail side. I think it would be a mischaracterization to say that the focus has been on other areas and not on liquidity and risk. And yes, the existing immediate payment system is a less, I won't say well structured. It's a settlement system designed for low-value P2P payments, which is what it's designed for. But every party involved, and Payments Canada, know that needs to be restructured for the higher value payments. Canada has the same vision of starting at a reasonably high rate and then slowly lifting up those RTR limits. So a comprehensive liquidity management and settlement risk system is going to be part of it. Okay. I don't think there's any ifs, ands, or buts.
I do agree. If I think back to the interviews that took place with commercial customers, definitely increasing the limit is going to be something that has to happen. If you look at Interact today and you look at on the P2P space, the maximum limit of $10,000, it probably is okay, and over time that should probably have to increase. But for commercial, I think with minimum limits of $25,000 to $50,000, I think per transaction is probably going to be required. But before we do that, we have to make sure, back to the safety and soundness, that the fraud systems and the underpinnings are in place across the entire ecosystem. So that's something that I know is top of mind and something that we think about. And I know Pedro and his bank, we're all thinking about making sure that underpinning and infrastructure is in place to support that.
Okay, take a last question here.
Thank you. From the bleachers, it seems that the Minister of Finance and the Governor of the Bank of Canada are sitting and not really part of this conversation, particularly when it comes to RTR and the, let's call it the lack of progress. What could or should the regulators be doing to help promote the development of such an infrastructure?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, okay, a strength, but also perhaps a slight weakness of the Canadian market is its ability to work together, right? The collaboration that goes on. On the one hand, that's great. It's something other markets like the U.S. just does not have, right? At such a mass level. And it's amazing that the banks all work together and everyone's trying to find a good compromise and make everyone happy. The problem is you're trying to make everyone happy, right? Which can slow things down. Kind of people have issues. I'm not happy with this. I'm not happy with that. From a regulator point of view, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they do need someone to kind of just put a firmer deadline, a little bit of a firmer deciding hand here and there, right? Maybe there needs to be someone to be able to pinpoint and say, okay, that's as close as we're going to get it. You bank B over there, or C, sorry. Whoever it may be, you're out of luck. We're going to go with this sort of model. So I don't know, perhaps there just needs to be a bit more of a firmer decision-making process from the regulator side, because I think that's probably what it would take. But you don't want to destroy that collaboration happening in the industry either. So it's a tough line.
Yeah, I'll say one of the hallmarks of Canada has been the collaboration. I mean, you go back to Interac. Speaking to my peers in the globe for years in a payments company, they look at Canada and they say, how did you guys do that? How did you end up with one central, low-cost, reliable infrastructure for debit cards? It's like, and then you talk to any of your peers in the States who, and the issues just multiply. I mean, you have 8 debit card networks, and you try rolling out EMV, and you just have a disaster over AIDs and the like. So it's worth the time to get it right in a collaborative model. So if that takes an extra 6 months or takes an extra year, the payment system is going to be here for 40 years. Okay, let's not get too impatient at the start. So I would rather Payments Canada have everybody get together, have everybody collaborate on a model that satisfies all stakeholders, and then move forward. So I'm not too chuffed about a 6 or a 12-month delay if we end up with the right system.
Yeah, and finance and the bank are very much engaged. They're in the room today. They're listening. I think innovation will also happen beside what's happening. Interac, you heard on the main stage, they are innovating, and they'll continue to innovate, and their members will benefit through that work. But I think to take 6 months and get this right, I think is prudent versus rushing to a conclusion and rolling something out that perhaps wouldn't address what the needs of our commercial customers in particular have been saying. So we have to make sure we get this right. So I think the pause is, in my view, a good approach, and we're nearing the end of that pause, and hopefully we can make some decisions and move forward. Thanks, Doug.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry, no, and just really to complement that, but I think that even the pause, like for my bank, I guess it will be the same thing on Derek's. The work is being done. It's a key priority within my group, within my organization, to get it ready. If it's within 6 months, if it's sooner or later. And also the market, no? All of the vendors are innovating because they want to get ahead of the game. They want our business. So I think that interaction to be ready and have the right products and solutions is there, no? And 6 months is relatively, it's a long window, it's a short window. I think it's everything relative. I think we'll be ready and be able to support it.
So on that, Pedro, I wanted to ask kind of final thoughts of everybody, and we'll go around the group here, but starting with you, what key piece of advice do you see for Canadian payments ecosystem and making sure that you're real-time ready?
Yes, and I think based on what David was saying is be able to have a strong and robust authentication process. That's the key, and then be able to really have and understand that fraud prevention, fraud detection needs to be a one component in the discussion. You need to be at the table from day one to be able to develop the strategies within the different stakeholders within the bank and with the ecosystem, so we can ensure that we deliver the basics right.
Okay. Giles, moving on to you.
So I'm just going to bring it right back to the topic of monetization. I mean, look, when it comes to real-time rails, and Paymon and all the rest of it, don't think of it as a silo. It's not just one little product area that's going to, you're going to get some new thing on top of and that's it. it really needs to dovetail through everything, right? Across the entire payments infrastructure, across, in fact, probably the entire banking relationship with your customers, right? Ultimately, it's not about, well, you're going to create this one solution that's going to have this one revenue model. It's about the customer experience, right? It's a little bit of an abused term these days, but it is about creating a better, more engaging experience, and it's getting that infrastructure. That's the really critical part, right? Once you get that in place, and you can, the sky's the limit as to what you can build on top of that, right? But it needs to be about, it's that broader piece. It's not just that one narrow RTR, and that's it.
Yeah, it is a bit overused, but I'll say it again. It is about the experience. But also, I think we have to collectively, as an ecosystem, just keep in mind and remember that there is that North Star out there that we're all working towards. And we are going to be tempted to get sucked into black holes along the way. But we have to keep in mind that we're all very much, we should stay focused on that North Star, and we will get through this. I'm optimistic, not just speaking for my bank, but speaking for the industry more broadly. I think we will get there. Some people will say it's not fast enough, but when we do get there, I think it'll be done in the right way, and our customers will benefit from that.
David?
Yeah, it's hard to beat something as poetic as the North Star. My analogy was a little more to the ground because I was going to talk about plumbing. And there's really two sides. Giles hit it. So there's the plumbing and the infrastructure side. So we have to focus on getting that right, both in each bank and the plumbing across the rails. But then the focus, the North Star, is the UX, is the customer experience. So the plumbing might be boring, and it's got to work. It's got to have water pressure. But then the consumer can go to Home Depot and pick from one of 100 faucets, right? So that's where we'll drive value. That's where we drive UX. But you still need the plumbing. We got to keep the focus on both.
Great. Well, thank you to each of you for sharing your viewpoints today and for all the good questions from the audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.